Good morning once again. Welcome to my sermon on thinning the veil. It is, as I mentioned at the beginning of our service today, spooky season, and you may notice that I am wearing as many spooky accessories as possible all at once. COVID has made it a little bit difficult for this femme to wear all of her fancy things, so I've just piled everything on together. I've got some creepy green hands holding my hair back. I think Priscilla and I should have a creepy hair accessory contest. I have a little haunted house pin, and it's got a bat, and if I pull it, these little ghosties go around. And then, of course, I've got my purple lipstick on. I love spooky season. October is witchy season, and as my spiritual explorations have lately led me, I am leaning in pretty hard to my witchier instincts. I am fascinated by the unknown. I am fascinated by the things we suspect we see, yet are somehow somewhat just beyond our sight. I am fascinated by the potentials of other consecutive realms. I am both terrified at the prospect of and long to grasp with clarity sources of the energies I think I sense but can't quite be sure. I've got friends with a haunted house. The woman who lived in their house previously sometimes appears in the corner of their living room or in the shadows of their kitchen. My friend tells me that their ghost suffered from dementia in the final years of her life. Their spirit housemate was Italian, an immigrant to this country. As her disease progressed, her husband made the choice to return to Italy for her final years of life. She died there, but the home that my friends rent was the last place she lived in which she was cognizant and present. Perhaps she occasionally appears, though with a translucent, static look, in the corner of the house because her soul is searching for what last felt like home. This is the time of year, the time when the lushness, the thriving, the pulsing growth of the natural world has reached its peak and is now falling ever more rapidly to its death. This is the time of year when we are reminded of the temporal nature of our being, when we move in the direction of the long, cold sleep. This is the time of year when the veil that separates the worlds of life and death, of the seen and unseen, known and unknown, are at its thinnest. This is the time of year when humans can stretch their senses towards the other side of being, to whatever may lay beyond, be it true organic finality or something else. Something not quite like living, perhaps like sleeping. Something our recurring insight into reduced presence grows and becomes sharpest in visibility. Spooky season is my favorite season. And perhaps because of the tumult of the current time, the next time we speak, because I am not preaching on the first Sunday in November, Election Day will finally be behind us. It is uncertain if we will know the results by the second weekend in November. But I know and I suspect that I am not alone in this feeling, that I am beyond stressed about what these next few weeks could bring us. I'm spending a lot of time listening to the news, scrolling Twitter for updates, and consuming multiple podcasts a week. I'm rattled, and while many of you may advise I unplug, I'm not sure that would help. For better or worse, I'm going to spend the next several days as informed as possible, recognizing it may take a toll on my overall well-being. So I think it's natural in such situations. I'm searching for outlets. Some of the outlets I choose myself: hot baths, fluffy novels, long walks. But My constantly simmering sense of impending doom that has become my companion in recent months is also looking for outlets, for something perhaps a bit closer to home to feel uneasy about. Thank goodness it's October, the month where we are reminded of our mortality, the month where the ghosts and ghouls come out to play, the season of the thinning of the veil. So I'm indulging in all things spooky. My partner and I are watching Halloween movies several times a week. I'm reading ghost stories and listening to creepy podcasts and smudging my house. Perhaps it's my imagination. Perhaps it's my unease attempting to grasp on to something beyond politics to explain the unease. But lately the air has felt charged. I don't know why. I can't explain it. And that's part of the fun. Things we can't explain are not necessarily things to be feared. And this is a season that allows us to indulge in the things that freak us out a little bit, while also giving us a chance to venerate our lost loved ones and to recognize that those who departed before we did may very well exist in the energy all around us. This is also the season where, perhaps, we can all lean in a bit to the rituals and spiritual practices typically associated with pagan, New Age, and Wiccan circles. While UUs are typically considered the most welcoming of churches for pagan spiritualists, the greatest barriers of leaning into magical ritual as a spiritual practice are twofold. The first is the feedback from those who don't understand ritual and magic work as effective and legitimate spiritual practices. Those of you who are New Age practitioners are probably familiar with the side eye and the mutterings about mumbo jumbo and the "do you also believe in fairies?" and "are you going to turn me into a frog?" There's also apparently a large amount of infighting within the wider pagan community. In my preparation for this message, I reached out to our own Marta Ferguson to discuss the most considerate way to engage ideas of magical ritual while remaining sensitive to spiritual appropriation. There is much debate within pagan and New Age circles regarding who has the right to claim to be something as powerful as, say, a witch. Debates around the legitimacy of lineage met with a surging of mostly, though not all, Generation Z spiritualists claiming the tradition regardless of heritage. I was offered a sliver of insight into some of the infighting within the New Age community, and I've also got thoughts about the recent capitalist commodification of witchcraft. On the one hand, I'm thrilled to see Gen Z sink their hands into ritual as a way of meaning making and divine connecting, and on the other, it annoys me that I can go to TJ Maxx and buy a witch kit for $17.99, as if spellcraft is an aesthetic and not, at least, an attempt at sacred space creating. All of that to say, expect a conversational sermon on the secret communal identity conversations of New Age spiritual practitioners and the cultural spillover making Wiccan both mainstream and potentially problematic, albeit in newish ways. But today's message focuses on the season of magic and how we can bring magic and ritual into our own lives as a way to bolster and grow our spiritual practice. All Saints' Day is November 1st. It is the older of the two Christian festivals, supplanting ancient pagan festivals in Europe, meant to pay homage to the caste of saints, who in the face of religious persecution and awful brutal execution, stayed fast in their faith, dying beloved by God and blessed by the Church. This is the small minority of faithful Catholics, believed to have surpassed purgatory's waiting room, winging straight to heaven, venerated on All Saints' Day. When the early church noticed that the people were persisting in praying for all of the departed, not only the blessed saints, but even their run-of-the-mill relatives and friends who were surely languishing in purgatory. And when the church saw people were reviving pagan customs in order to do this, the clergy took control and established All Souls' Day on November 2nd, when prayers could be properly spoken, masses sung, and candles lit for everyone stuck in purgatory, all the less than perfect souls, which is almost everyone, who might, throughout the prayers and petitions of the living, be redeemed on Judgment Day. It was a mighty capitulation to populism, if not quite to equality. Fast forward now several centuries and jump across the ocean and a continent, and the American Unitarian William Ellery Channing would proclaim in the 19th century, "I am a living member of the great family of all souls." Many Unitarian churches were inspired to take the name All Souls, as had many Universalists already, believing as they did that in the end, the very end, all of us are saved. None of us are damned or forgotten or irredeemable. While I recognize the theological differences within this place, and I expect a fair degree of feedback regarding all of this postulation about an afterlife of any kind, I, for one, can get right on board with this idea of the great family of all souls. Our seventh principle, a respect for the interconnected web of existence of which we are all a part, demonstrates this. All Souls' Day connects the realm beyond the living for those of us who hope there is something beyond what we experience here on earth. And those of us who believe that death is final, we can still find meaning in the ritual of remembering those we love who have passed on, imparting the lessons learned from their lives, reflecting on how their stories shaped and inspired our own. Immortality does not necessarily need to mean a literal place like heaven or hell, but rather the continued memory sustained by those who knew us, passed through generations of storytelling. Kate Braystrup, UU chaplain and writer, says that hell is when you die and nobody cares. We live for as long as our memories do, and when even those have faded, we are woven into the vast tapestry of the narrative of humankind. I mentioned at the beginning of my message that ritual and spell casting, some may call it witchcraft, has grown to be a strong part of my own spiritual practice. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about building an ancestral altar. Because of the history of the Christian calendar that I just discussed, and the generalized belief that this is the time of year when ancestral communication is most effective, sometime between October 31st and November 2nd would be a great time to make an altar of your own. We all have ancestors, and if you believe, like I do, in the woo-woo concepts of guardian angels or spirit guides, the spirits of our ancestors accompany us to our birth and then journey with us through to our deaths, when we ourselves join them in the great cloud of saints and witnesses. There may be some of you that have no interest in venerating your ancestors because they were decidedly bad people. Maybe far back in your lineage, you have ancestors who were slave owners. Or maybe, like me, you have more recently deceased ancestors who were abusers, relatives who abused and committed violence to your still living relatives. And maybe, like I am, you are recently coming to recognize the enduring ripples of violence and abuse within your own family history. Maybe you are coming to see the way that pain and violence is continuing to cause harm to yourself and your still living family. All the more reason to build an ancestral altar. We carry our traumas generationally. we are wounded generationally, and it is up to those of us who remain, who have survived, to heal the generational trauma so that our family line can be released from the violence of its past and create new lineage of wholeness. Perhaps one of the tools of healing comes from communing with those ancestors who caused harm. I don't mean that you need to get chummy with or forgive the sins of your departed family members, but instead you can let them know that their generational energies of harm are no longer welcome because its lingering is continuing to harm the living. Or perhaps you have a grandmother who, by the nature of her era and her circumstance, was kept from living a life of her choosing. Perhaps you can commune with her and let her know that you yourself are thriving and continuing to dismantle the patriarchy on her behalf, and that her spirit can rest in peace. It's also okay if you are not ready or simply do not want to connect with any of your ancestral ancestors. You can do this same ritual venerating a historical figure, like an author or a musician who has influenced your life. If you would like to build an ancestral altar at home, here's what you need, and it's very simple. A couple of white candles. I use white candles in my ritual practice because of the energy of white wax, believed to be sort of one of the purest energy forms. So I have 2 candles for my altar today because I'm going to be recognizing both of my grandmothers. I also have here, and these are just some add-ons. The only other thing that you'll need, ancestral altars can be very simple, or of course you can dress them up. The only other thing that you would need would be a glass of water. And this is the offering. It's always nice if you're venerating or recognizing an ancestor or spirits that is passed on to offer them something. And so I have here a cool, clean glass of water. I also have some extra things just to add a little bit of aesthetic loveliness. And they all have special meaning. So this is a pouch of lavender. And I love the scent of lavender. And this comes just down the road where there's a lavender and alpaca farm. And unfortunately, their gift shop has been closed due to COVID. But I buy several of these pouches and I put them in my sweater drawers and things. So I have this pouch of lavender. I also have here a braid of sweetgrass. And this sweetgrass was grown by my friend Dee. They have a wildflower garden. They live in Minnesota. And they spend a lot of the late summer weaving together the sweetgrass that grows in their backyard. And they give it to friends for ritual and other things. It also smells really lovely. And then one of the last things that I have is a little basket woven out of sweetgrass. This also smells incredible, and I would smell it, but I'm noticing that all of these various herbs are making me feel a little sneezy. So I'm going to try to get through this without sneezing. My father sent this to me as a gift, and this was woven by a member of the Penobscot tribe in Down East, Maine. My father lives, like all residents of Down East, Maine, on Penobscot Indian territory. And so this is a basket woven by the indigenous folks that live in Down East, Maine. So this is my ancestral altar. This is what I have built to recognize and to venerate my grandmothers today. And you can assemble something like it or something similar in your own home pretty easily. Or you can get really fancy, or you can take all the stuff but the candles and the water away, and that's just fine too. So at this point, I'm going to go through the ritual that I would go through if I were alone and not being watched by 60 of my closest friends. And I'm going to go through the ritual of venerating my grandmothers. So the first thing that I'm going to do, and this is sage, and this also comes from indigenous populations in Wyoming, and sage is a purifying herb. So I'm going to go ahead and light this. If you're going to use sage in most contexts, make sure you open a window. It has air purification properties, and that's true scientifically. But just go ahead and open a window. Oh, I am definitely going to sneeze. It's coming. Maybe not. Maybe I'm okay. So I'm just kind of purifying the space around and purifying the altar and maybe purifying myself a little bit and just kind of getting in to the ritual space. I'm going to leave that there. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to close my eyes. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to envision a pure white light surrounding me and surrounding my ancestral lineage. Like I said, I'm honoring my grandmother Lois, my mother's mother, and my grandmother Evelyn, my father's mother. And I'm recognizing the ancestral trauma that comes from those two sides of the family. And I'm picturing their faces as I remember them in my head. And with that white purifying light, I'm offering to release some of that pain and some of that trauma that's being carried through the lineage. I'm picturing that light too and expressing gratitude for the life that I have today and for the long line of people who came before me. I'm offering also this glass of water. This is my offering. And I'm picturing this water quenching old thirsts, whether those thirsts belong to Lois or Evelyn themselves, or these thirsts existed throughout the entire ancestral lineage and my entire heritage. And now I'm going to light my candles. I light this first candle for Lois Peck. Apologize for my sniffing. And I light this second candle for Emma Peterson. So I'll leave this altar up probably for at least a couple of hours today. And when I'm finished with this altar, what will I do with the water? Well, I'll probably take a sip of it myself. And then I'll be sure to return it to the earth. I won't pour it down the drain. I won't consume all of it on my own. I'll probably take it outside and I'll return it to the earth. So this is how you build an ancestral altar. This is one of the ways that you can venerate your ancestors, or one of the ways that you can simply put yourself in a space of prayer. You can do this once a year, or you can build a larger altar to work with more regularly, or something that you can assemble and take down kind of whenever you want to. Seasonally, this is considered one of the best times for ancestral veneration, but that doesn't mean that this is the only time of year that you can venerate your ancestors. If you do decide to create an altar of your own, I'd love to hear about it. Share it on your Facebook group throughout the week. Or if you have a favorite ghost story or spooky movie or Halloween activity, I invite you to share it on our Facebook group as well. I want to thank you for letting me share a little bit of my own spiritual practice with you today. And I want to remind you that in these coming weeks, which are so intense and so anxiety producing, to seek out rituals and practices that connect you to the divine, that connect you to the earth, that connect you to yourself, and find opportunities to release some of those anxieties and some of those fears through ritual work. Thank you very much for joining me today. Amen and blessed be.